Okay, for people joining this meeting, this is Wolfram Language Design Review. This is part of our incremental language development sequence. And looks like, first off, we are talking about a very good new idea that doesn't yet have a good name. Okay, so we've got some. Go ahead. Shall I pull up the?
Yeah, Ian started putting together a ref page under ref/supplied. There's a couple of other topics here. We also have Tom Sherlock here to talk about autocomplete, since that was something you brought up.
Okay.
You can attack these in whatever order piques your interest, but I thought the ref
Right, well, I think first of all, so as you started, have you started an implementation of this thing?
We haven't really, because there's a lot of tendrils. We could potentially look at an implementation in a top level discrete function, but I don't know whether there's a framework that says we can have a single implementation of applied and functions like map and replace and select can just tie into it, or if there are going to be a bunch of function specific hooks, or we could fake it out effectively with up values as a prototype.
Yeah, that's what I think we should try to do, because I think we're going to see some issues there.
I did implement this for tree map. I have a branch open for that.
Okay. And how does it feel? It seems to work well.
Yeah.
I mean, you're happy with it.
Yeah, I want to add that to also like tree fold and also all of the tree visualization options. And I think it's going to be very useful in all of those cases.
Okay. So how much are we done? Okay. Has somebody looked through what other functions can take this?
Have we looked at that? Yes, this is the initial list that I put together. Every symbol you see here in the notes.
Okay. So these are mostly functional programming operations. Do we think there's anything outside of the domains you've picked up there where we're just not thinking, but it should be there? Anything like with entities or something like that?
So I think this could be in almost any domain.
I think images.
Question of where do we want to start?
I know that, I understand, but I'm trying to get a design. Don't image measurements have some weird thing that's a bit like this? I mean,
component measurement has it.
What does it do?
And it's the selection function.
What does that mean?
So basically, there are two ways. I mean, I just think the only similar thing is the association syntax. You see that, for example, the second example has component measurement elongation count. So of course, that knows that it has to compute count as well.
Right. But so this is something
property, but not return property.
Right. So this is something where it is. I mean, I can imagine, for example, in graphs, I think we maybe talked about this before, where, vertex shape function, this is clearly a useful thing. Am I making sense? Because right now, I mean, so here's another place where it's useful, is in the graphics functions where we are saying, like a color function, for example. Okay, so let's look at those two cases. So I claim we should be looking at cases where things implicitly take multiple function arguments, okay? So this is a case where here, see this statement there? Right, this thing here. That's a case where surely we should be able to do it like this with named arguments there. Does that make sense to people?
Like center, vertex, and dimensions.
Yeah, for example. Or center name.
Well, one of the problems there is that that we faced, at least with the component measurement, and we kind of skipped that when we was in conflict with the existing syntax. It was that this type of function takes a sequence of arguments, while the other thing requires an association as the first argument. So unless we want to do something magical by parsing a literal.
No. That's the whole idea.
There's two forms of supplied for that reason.
Okay.
Right, but so clearly something of this generality would have to be implemented one function at a time, right? There's no way this can be a framework.
Yep,
I agree. I mean, the core thing will be set up, but okay.
I would like a framework, or at least just a tool to do the lexical scanning.
Of course,
so that each developer doesn't have
to. So we've got these kinds of functions. The other one I would like to point to is things like color function. Which again has this issue that, we can see in that. I mean, look at all these things. I mean, this is somewhat a luxury item here, but having the possibility of these things being named seems highly useful to me. I mean, and if we allow those names, we can potentially bring in yet different attributes that we were not able to make use of here because we didn't want 7 arguments. Am I making sense?
Mm-hmm. So for example, like the tree element shape function option, I think I would think the simplest thing is it just takes the data by default, and then you can bring in things like position and all the extra things if you want, as opposed to vertex shape function, where it's the 3 that vertex shape function had in mind initially.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What's the story here? Okay, so this thing here, I'm trying to understand this. This is with the first argument used to define the things you're pulling in.
Yeah, so the 2 argument form, you give a sequence of arguments. The 1 argument form, you give an association.
The 2 argument form. Oh, really? Okay. So that's what we want to do. We don't want to have this 2 argument form simply define what elements there will be in the association. We think that's redundant.
And also the 2 argument form can use symbols that have definitions, and the 1 argument form can only work with pure functions.
Sure. Oh, I see what you're saying. You're saying, but I mean, the 2 argument form could simply be a pruning of the association. Don't bother to look up.
Well, so that's the example below. You see, like if you map indexed a pure function, you're going to be putting a pure function in rather than wrapping the thing in F. And in the 1 argument form, it's even different because you would also need to be putting associations in.
I'm sorry, I'm totally confused.
Look at the 3 map. So map indexed F of hold of 1 + 1, 2 + 2. That's strictly just putting F's into the expression.
Yes.
You can't accomplish that with a pure function in the first argument.
What about the pure function f of #1, #2?
No, look, that's what you get. You have that pure function around the arguments instead of F.
What?
My point is
because
just
it's hold.
my point is
Yeah,
just
I
that the pure
understand.
function
Yeah.
is not the same as the F. It's just that observation.
It's because
when
map
there's a hold.
inserts and
You're
meta
literally
values.
putting a pure function in. You're not literally putting an F in.
Yeah. Until you're asking, should we be putting, in this case,
And that may or may not do what you want.
well, I don't understand. What's the objection here? I mean, of course, this is true. If you have a hold there, it will take whatever you put here and it will wrap that around it. And in this case, it won't evaluate. We know that.
His point is that you could, using right, that map supplied of whatever, right? It's literally giving you right, you'd literally end up with if this were actually implemented, right, you would actually end up with the index raised to the expression as opposed to
Right. Which you can't do with the pure function form, which is required by the one argument form of supplied. So it's just a limitation of pure functions that is
I'm sorry, I'm totally
just there. And I'm just saying that
I'm totally confused. What's the issue? The issue is that when you hold it, it doesn't evaluate, or what? What's the issue?
The point is that map is not it does not evaluate the function it's applying. It's just inserting
Indeed
things. So I'm saying.
So what's the point here? Is this evaluating?
My point is that you won't be able to get /index to the slot expression unless you use the two argument form. My point is,
how is this different from map indexed? How is this different from normal map indexed?
Well, I'm just saying that
when it does evaluate,
supplied is what I'm saying.
When it does evaluate,
the two argument form of supplied does what map indexed does. The one argument form does not.
Right, but if it ever does evaluate, it'll give the exact same result, right?
You can't make the assumption that you want it to ever evaluate like that.
Right, but I'm just saying that, yeah, I mean, if you put it in a hold, you're going to get some different expression because you wrote a different function in. But if you ever release the hold, it's going to evaluate to the same thing, won't it?
But my point is, why are you assuming that you will release the hold later?
No.
Yeah, but this, I mean, why is this not done by using? I mean, I know map doesn't run iFunction on its thing and actually do this, but why do we want to actually construct this association? Why don't we run iFunction on it with?
I would think so.
Is there anything special about supply that requires this bizarre thing? That just doesn't make sense.
Well, actually, I mean, that's
what are you calling the bizarre thing, Rob?
The fact that it doesn't substitute the element.
That you're creating an association, and B, that it's all this held thing instead of running, the lexical substitution.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the lexical substitution can be done without evaluating.
Right, and my point is only the two argument form of supplied can do that. The one argument form cannot because it's limited to pure functions.
Well, it could.
Well, no,
I mean, it could do.
I mean, this is one of the things that we talked about early on as well, which is that for the sake of optimization, it kind of better not have to construct the association in the one argument form. I mean, conceptually, that's what it's doing, but in practice, it'd be nice if it doesn't.
In practice, the thing to do is to create a hash table, which is the hash map thing and this thing, and then replace the values, with those keys with the associated things as they come up, rather than create an association every single time you're evaluating a function.
This is the wrong idea.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
So you would fill the slots and then strip off the outer function wrapper, but not do an evaluation.
I think so.
Yeah, I would fill those slots based on some kind of a hash table lookup. It doesn't have to be an association lookup. It just needs to be a hash table lookup to be efficient.
Out of curiosity, also, what happens if you call? Let me think if there's a way of getting this to happen. Like, what happens if you call map over, like, I don't know, a hold of associations, and you use the hash key syntax? Does it fill them in, or does it stay unevaluated?
Stays unevaluated.
Yeah, right. Which I guess makes sense with that setup. I'm just wondering if there's a setup where you could somehow get them to fill.
Oh, there are. I mean, it's like using numbered slots within functions that themselves have numbered slots. There's some scoping that's done, but you're not. It's not always guaranteed to be exactly what you expect.
Okay. All right. So what we're proposing here is that. Go ahead.
Right. So what is the one argument form? The one argument form is
A pure function, which will be the main point about it is lexically scanned for keys.
okay.
And it applies to association.
Conceptually applies to an association.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the other form is definitely
Did those
not
do
conceptual.
those keys have to be in the list that's shown in the ref page, or could they be any random keys?
They
And that's
cannot be
not-
random keys. They're
Okay,
because they
so-
are brought in from the environment, and only certain things are known in that environment.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's.
I mean,
that's
arguably, we should have a key that is the list of keys that can be brought in. See what I'm saying? Hash
And you
key.
just say keys of hash. I mean, I guess that's less efficient, but if you, I mean, this is a discovery thing, right?
Well, I'm just saying hash keys should be the list of the strings that are the names of the keys.
But keys of hash will do the same thing, won't it?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, so we'd have to scan for that, right?
Well, I don't know if we have to scan for, I mean, that's kind of, I would argue that's a pretty niche discovery thing that you're
Yeah.
not going to have
No, I understand that, but
performance-dependent
I'm
code.
saying in the lexical scanner that's looking lexically at this pure function, if it sees a naked hash, that's what it will do with it.
Yes, absolutely. If it sees a naked
Mhm.
hash, then it does have to actually construct the association.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So let me understand the two argument form here. So the two argument form is effectively like it is pulling things into a function, and it's then going to just supply these as the hash1, hash2 of this pure function here, correct?
It's just
So
going
they
to
will
it's going
supply
to
it to
wrap
whatever is
whatever
the-
expression is there with the elements corresponding to what you specify. It's just a wrapping thing.
Right.
You
So if
wrap
that's
power
F,
around the
if
index
that
of the
thing is
expression.
F, that
Mhm.
will put it onto hash index, whatever hash index, whatever the value would have been for hash index and hash.
Yes.
expression.
Mhm.
Okay. That sounds good to me. Now,
And if it's not a list, then it's an additional argument.
I'm sorry, what do you mean if it's not a list?
Look at the second bullet point where you say supplied of just the string index.
This is
Oh,
the thing we
right.
talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's nice.
So it'll in map, the default is the one argument that is the expression. And so you give the index as an additional argument at the end. But if it's something that has already multiple arguments, like fold, the F takes 2 arguments. So
Okay.
it would be giving it as a third argument.
What should this thing be called? Let's have one little poke at that right now. If we can't figure it out right now, we will keep going, and it'll.
Well,
come
I
back,
can tell you what it should not be called, and that's associated.
right. Explain why.
Right, because first of all, it's making a link to association, which, right, we're not going to sort of literally be constructing.
All right. Okay. You might be right. Okay. Can somebody tell me, Avery? Do you know where I put the notes on this stuff?
It's in the multi-computation folder, SW Notes 08.
Thanks.
Another problem is that it sort of adds to we then have association, associated, and like associate
All right.
to.
My brilliant idea is dying on the vine. So it goes. All right.
I argued for using, which Christopher has the programmer's objection to that. That's sort of like a pound include type in multiple programming languages, which I understand. I'm not sure I agree with, but I understand that concern.
Well, having never seen this before, I was able to get the idea of what it was from supplied without, too much mental aerobics.
Yeah. It's a little bit the wrong type of. It would be more like supplying, although supplied.
Yeah. I mean, to me, what it implies is the idea they're coming from sort of the traversal environment, basically, and they're supplied by the traversal environment, which is nice.
Umbilicaled.
But we've got these two different forms. One of which, I think, the more obscure case. It's just not the right type of, it's just rather weird. I mean, we've got these two cases. We've got a case where it gives the argument explicitly. I mean, if that case said, let's look at our cases here. We've got this thing here. And by the way, whatever happened to the discussion about this in rules? Did we understand that also? What was
somebody suggested like rule slot?
No, I'm sorry.
Well, no. This is you want for replace all. You want on the right hand side to be able to ask where the replacement was made.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's what we're talking.
And I think each time we came to this, I don't know. We sort of, I mean, I think each proposal we had was sort of troubled, and I think it's a bit of a, yeah.
Well, but it's a very useful thing, don't you think?
Potentially. I mean, part of the problem is just that the right hand side of a rule, in the case of something like replace, is a pattern, not a function, and these are really not the same thing.
But I mean, that function, the slash.
I mean, by the way, you can already do some amount of that. Well, no, okay, I guess not. I was gonna say you could do some amount of that just with pattern matching, but not at arbitrary depth.
Right, but I mean, so what is it that we want here? We want something where we can say, blah slash dot, and then we want to say, f of x blank, for example, slash semicolon, only if this thing, let's say, I'm writing down something rough, hash depth is less than 5.
Maybe a
Right,
simpler
and
example.
that theoretically could be supplied, right? Because
Well, how would it work?
no.
We'd say, no, but this wouldn't take a function usually. I mean, we could say something like,
right, I guess it's an expression. So
yeah. So
Right,
what is,
and well, okay. I mean, maybe another example. Would this work as well? Would be something like, x slash dot f of x, colon greater than, g of the position at which this replacement was done.
yeah. Right.
Right.
What we need is a different kind of function here that basically fills in. Okay, what we need, this thing.
I don't think this is replaced.
I think you need an alternative to slot.
Why? I think you need
slot is for functions.
No.
This is like a slot for pattern matching.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, okay.
I mean, this is the fundamental problem: is that it's just like we have all these function versus cases versus select. This is like we have supplied, which is for select, and we're trying to use it in cases.
right. Well, what happens if you and I mean
Why isn't this a preprocessor? Why doesn't it? Because this isn't going to change. This is for any given application of this rule. This is am I right, or is that not true? I was thinking, oh gosh, no, because then maybe
you wanting to reuse slot outside of function.
No, I'm looking to have a thing where this rule, before slash dot even picks up and looks at this rule, it is resolved. Do you get what I'm saying? Yeah, in fact,
you could have a symbol. I mean, we could just have a magic symbol that's called I don't know, pattern matching context, not that name, but pattern matching context. And you would just write G of pattern matching context of quotes depth or something like that.
Yeah, right.
And that just gets replaced along with all the bound, variables.
Are you just trying to control where the rule gets applied, or also
No,
specify things on the
potentially trying to
right-hand
give
side?
potentially trying to give that value.
Right. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure this is actually a good idea, but I was going to suggest maybe if we had if we used supplied here, then it should probably be the second, right, the head of the second argument. So it should wrap the entire rule. I'm still not sure that solves our problem, but
Here, like this.
yes.
I'm not sure it's a good idea, because I think that that's using a rule as something to be applied to things that this isn't. So I'm going to ask the question: if we had a decent name for this and it wasn't as insane as that, is this a reasonable thing to try to do? Is this semantically correct? That this is something just that is seen by the pattern matcher, and whenever it sees one of those,
It's not seen, it's replaced. I mean, I think what it would be is that anytime, as in a condition or on the right-hand side of a rule, or in any of these cases where basically it's taking bound pattern variables and replacing them, it would also replace this.
right. So you're saying in a case like this, where we're saying that it can say and PE depth, less than 5.
Sure.
Now,
and
okay.
I would argue that anytime you're in a context like in a condition or the right-hand side of a rule, and you're replacing pattern variables, you probably have all the information you need to replace these as well.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. I mean, there are even meta things that one could imagine that says things like, that says things like, number matched so far, or, blanks matched so far.
That's a little scarier, but
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, theoretically, yes, given the structure of the pattern matching code, I'm not sure that's actually
A thing you can answer.
an answer.
Yeah, okay, well, fair enough. But I mean, what
Problem
I'm saying
I
is,
see
what's
is
that?
that if you, another issue I see is, presumably you're thinking of this in context of, say, replace all or cases or something. But what if somebody defines a down value with this? What's the actual level at which a down value fires? If, say, it's inside another down value, which is code for that.
Yeah, well, presumably the keys that you can supply this are, they're not universal for all patterns. It depends on what function this pattern is being used
Right.
by.
So that's what I'd find a bit problematic, because
What would it actually return? It would say missing, not available, probably. But that then requires a whole confirm structure around it and so on.
Right. But realize down values, when you enter down values and you look at the down values, those are just given as rules, right?
Yeah, but the fact is you're passing through a filter there of don't use this if you're making a down value definition.
Right. Do we have any other pattern constructs that only work in some patterns but not all? I mean, are there any things like, you can't, in these patterns, in this context, you can't bind names to them or something like that?
There are corner cases. Well, 2 things I've mentioned. One is something that was in version 0.9 that never made it to version 1.0, which was the cut these patterns, that, return unevaluated. If you get to this state, return unevaluated. See what I'm saying? In other words, a return self type thing. We had a couple of mechanisms for that, and we really should relook at those again sometime. But those work only in down value stuff. They don't really work in because in an ordinary /dot, replace all situation, all it says is, I don't match, sorry, and it just goes on. It's in the down value case that you kind of done a whole bunch of computation, and then it says, I guess, well, it could happen in /dot as well. So in other words, it's a thing where, given the right-hand side makes the decision that actually it didn't match. See what I'm saying? So not in a /.
I guess This didn't make it in though, right?
It didn't make it in. Right. It's been languishing for a third of a century.
Right. But I guess the question is whether there's any precedence
Okay.
for having something which is, only works in cases but not in, match queue or something.
So blank works in like expression patterns and string patterns, but string patterns have different kinds of constructs that don't work for expression patterns.
Yeah, it's sort of an analogy.
Yeah,
I mean,
those are. I would argue those are just totally different things, though. But yeah.
okay, but the question here is, I don't even know that all keys for this pattern environment thing would not work in down values.
We're not even down values. I mean, there's just even stuff like, match queue. I mean, match. I guess it can say depth is 1 or something, or 0, or I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing that there are keys that, maybe we need to actually list down what keys you want. But I bet that there are things that you'd have in cases that you won't have in match queue.
Okay, the basic point here is, this is relevant for, recursive burrowing functions like /dot. It's not relevant even for replace, is it?
Well, I mean, you might be able to have. I mean, there might be some interesting things.
why
Like, for example,
wouldn't
you might be able to ask it for an association of all the bound variables.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Or something like that.
Replaces
that-
the traversal of an expression, so I think it also applies there.
Well, but okay, but then in terms of the bound variable lists and so on, that would work in down values too.
Sure.
I mean, that is a useful thing. So I mean, yes. So one key would be something like bound variable rules or something.
Or it wouldn't. It's an association, isn't it? Because they can't
Probably.
be repeats.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we sometimes call that whatever. Okay, but yeah, I mean, that seems like an interesting thing right there, which we've never had, is what matched. Look, I like the idea of having this just be some magic symbol that is simply filled in either from the environment or from the pattern instancing. And if you ask for depth and you're doing cases, for example, well, it is looking, that is the thing which is looking outward, as it is in most of the map cases, map situation with whatever supplied is called there. So yes, so now here's a question. Why is this construct not the way that we do things for map as well? In other words, why not have this a thing that in map evaluates, a magic token that has the same feature that it. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, it's a little bit weird in terms of scope, but you could do the same thing.
I mean, conceptually, hash is basically that magic token. Is a weird way to think about it.
Yes,
I mean,
but
with the things we're talking about with supplied.
I think this needs some kind of syntax, like slot does.
Well,
because compare with like supplied, where you do have the two arguments, or even not, like just having a symbol around the keys instead of just like slot expression.
Hold on a second. Are you saying that the fact that we are, I mean, if we had a funky symbol for this, okay, then we could presumably over here, instead of doing this, we could actually get away with this. And this will be our funky whatever it is.
Right, and basically the implementation, I mean, honestly, the implementation for on the side of map or something would probably be much simpler, because it basically just has to, lexically replace, all the whatever this funky symbol is, in a similar way to how function replaces hashes, but obviously it wouldn't be with function. And then it, calls the function.
Right,
I
but you
don't think
couldn't.
the
But,
question
but
mark.
right, but the thing would have to be literally present, right? You couldn't do something like. Well, I guess you can't. You couldn't do something.
No, the question, what you're asking, Atai, is if a function called from the function, you say map of f, comma, whatever, and now I think this is very well badly defined anyway, that somewhere inside the body of f, it now reaches out and says, oh, that map that I was called from, use the index from that map that I was called from. I claim that's not very well defined, because by the time you're a couple of levels down, you have no idea which map it was that you thought you were called from.
Yeah, I mean, also I would argue it would be bad programming practice just because it's kind of like when you write a function, it should be able to work outside of the context of this one particular map.
Right, but I guess my claim is, if I have my function f and I want it, am I going to write f of funky symbol of depth, or am I going to write f of funky symbol of depth ampersand?
No, just funky symbol of depth. If you want the ampersand stuff, you would be able to.
All right, well then how you know, I mean, I guess it's
That would have to be on like the
so
right
then
hand
we have
side
to
of the.
so then we have to scan every single expression that's given, lexically scan for funky symbol, that, you know.
Well,
Everything that would be on the left-hand side of a map or something. Yeah, yes.
We have efficient ways to do that. I don't think we should freak out about that immediately. But semantically, what this is doing is it's saying, this is a thing that it's like a with. Map is effectively putting in a with there that is replacing the funky symbol with the actual value based on the current environment of the map. Correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Is it the case that this funky symbol can either be used in the body of a pure function or on the right hand side of a set or set delayed?
Can be used
You're
anywhere.
asking is it the same funky
Like
symbol as we're
it
talking
doesn't
about
make
for
sense to me to
patterns?
have f of funky symbol in the map unless you're doing a pure function there.
Well, there's a rare case if you have some operator form or something.
Yeah, well, you
Where
can
you'd
just give that
say-
thing explicitly. You just say f of, whatever this thing is, hash question mark index, and that's it. And you're saying map that, and that happens to be the, that would otherwise be a map indexed of hash 2 sub 1.
Maybe for now, don't the hash question mark syntax is both very weird, and I think it's also confusing because there's a hash in it when there's no ampersand.
Fair point. Okay, let me just, where am I saving this to? This is an ILD. Okay, what just for my, what could we conceivably use for this?
So what would that do? The f of funky symbol index?
It would just replace. It would just put in. Okay, do you want me to write
It
it
would
out?
map over the function. Try, yeah. Do
It
So
would do
it's
this.
mapping a different expression over each part.
Look, all it is this.
Wait, no. That would
Okay,
not be
I mean,
because
last
there's no
one,
ampersand
slide
of hash 1. After before the ampersand, just do open bracket hash 1. There you go.
Yes, that's what it would do.
So
Okay.
basically, it's just
That to
that
me
you
is
know.
a lot weirder than what we were talking about with patterns, where you're putting something on the right hand side of a rule. It's like you're
I mean, basically, what
particularly weird.
your mapping is changing.
I mean, what this basically is, again, I'm not sure this is a good idea, but I mean, basically what this is, it's just, in the same way that you can have a pure function and it will, replace all the slots or something. This is just on the, the first argument of the map is sort of treated as not a pure function, but a something and it will replace all of these, and then it will do the, if you happen to give it a pure function, then it will do all the replacements of the slots. So it's kind of
An
like
environment function.
it's a 2-pass thing. Yeah.
But okay, so just to give a sense of what we could do here, I mean, we could have.
I mean, you could even conceptualize it. Another way you could conceptualize it, but this is not how you'd want to do it, is that, the map has a call to block, and it's just setting this
Yes.
This symbol. It's like evaluation context or something. That's not the right name. And as some association or something, or even with down values.
I don't know if that's available syntax. Is that available syntax?
It's extremely obscure.
It is very
but
obscure.
it's probably
I mean,
available.
But this thing would have to have a name. So this is called, if it's like environment variable. It's what we were talking about before. It's an ambient value or something.
Context is obviously taken, but otherwise something like that could work.
I don't think that's that.
I'm not sure if the value. I mean, in both of these cases, I'm not sure if the value adds anything other than.
I don't think it does
less
really.
Obscure.
Yes, well, I think it's that's one of its objectives is to sound less obscure.
So is this an alternative to supplied? Because I don't see how you would use this in the symbols with definitions case.
I think this is what do you mean the symbol definition? Yes,
I want to define a
I think
F and then put that in my code. How do I use this feature with that?
I think this
think
would
you
make
don't.
that unnecessary, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's still the useful case. I mean, I think that's the case. The 2-argument case of supplied, where you just give it a string in the first argument. That is still something that I think is not.
Why is that useful? I don't understand why that's useful. Why are you not just?
Why is it useful to have the symbol power in the language?
No.
Instead of having a huge pure function every time you want to do a power.
No, you're being silly. Look at this thing.
That's what I'm saying. I will want to write code where I use F. I'm just asking how to use this feature with that at all. I don't see.
I don't understand
a bad answer to that question is that you can say F equals function of blah blah blah.
No. Why? I don't understand.
desirable.
Why is there a problem here? This thing here, you'd be able to say things like, well, whatever this thing is, that will be what it would look like, and it would you just say map.
That's not that, but so your solution is to exactly not do the thing that I'm asking to do.
What are you trying to do? What do you want to do?
I don't want to use a pure function. I want to have a function F that I just define down values or whatever kinds of definitions for.
I think the point is that you just define it to have 2 arguments. One of them is the value, one of them is the index, and then when you want to map with it, the point is that you would have to
and special pattern matching.
No, you don't.
No,
You're not going to do that. You're not going to do it. The fact is, if you're going to use, so the one case that you're not going to get is the case that map index does right now, where you mysteriously can say map index to F comma whatever, and you happen to know that the second argument to F that's supplied to F is the position list, right? You will not get that case. You would have to, instead of that, you would have to explicitly say, I want to get the index list put into the second argument of F. But I don't think that's bad, because
so if I defined F separately, then I would also have to use the 3-argument form of function potentially to have a pure function with the same attributes as F.
What?
I mean, the thing is, look.
You're just
in
not-
a supplied case. In a supplied
You
case,
said my point was
the
silly,
way-
but it's the point that I'm making, which is you want to define symbols.
no, right. But I don't think there's anything. I think the symbol you define is totally analogous in this case that it would be in a supplied case, right? So there's 2 cases with supplied. One is you just do. One is you do sort of a single argument applied, and it feeds the whole association to your function, right? The other case is you give it right, and then the other case is you give it certain like curated arguments. Like you say supplied of I want the element, I want the index, etc. The second case the way you'd write that here is you just write map of f of, hash, hash index, or not hash index, but you do, hash funky symbol index, funky symbol position, etc. I mean, it's the same thing. It's just instead of putting the list in the first argument of supply, you put it into these arguments there.
No, it really isn't. Because first of all, you've lost the attributes of f by putting it in a pure function. And the second is, right, we were talking about we could directly substitute things in and not have the, not have sort of the pure function there. And I think we've lost that, right? Because you have to go now through the pure function. It'll have to stay. In fact, I'm not entirely sure how this.
No, it does not have to.
I'm not sure, in fact, even how this would work.
No, this does not require any pure function at all. This is just, it just substitutes it.
Well, sub values are different things than down values. So this would require you to define f using sub values.
In this particular case, yes.
So that's what I'm saying. Just a simple question, how do I use down values with this? I don't see the answer.
No, you have to.
I'm sorry, I don't totally understand. I mean, other than maybe the attributes case, which I argue is kind of niche. I mean, it's not super common that I rarely even set attributes for down values that, for random little internal functions. And so, I mean, it's maybe other people do, but then assuming you don't have attributes, it's just map of, and then the arguments you want.
I'm saying that at the point that you've chosen to define a function and call it f, you want to then write code that has f in it and not have to staple a bunch of boilerplate to it or wrap it in a pure function.
But see, what that pure function is providing, the point is, okay, one of the questions is, at what point do you specify, hey, I'd like to get the index, or I'd like to get the position, or I'd like to get whatever field? And I think one option is that you ask for that inside of f, and the other option is that you ask for that, outside of the f, but somehow inside of the map. And I would argue that asking for the index for the first time inside of an f defined with down values is kind of, I think that would be bad code, if nothing else, because it just means that the function is sort of mysteriously tied in some way so that you can only use it inside of map. Which I'm going to want to write a function. I'm going to write lots of functions that can only ever be called from within a supplied of a certain type. Right, but that's because they have an argument that they expect to be an association with certain keys, right?
Well, it expects to be a sequence of arguments.
Yes. Look, your function has 3 arguments. Let's say you expect the second one to be an index. Okay, but you could. You could call your function in a test or something with just a 3 as the second argument. You didn't have to come from a named thing called index. And what we're arguing about is whether what you do is to just put the f there, whether you're specifying what the arguments should be by having explicit supplied wrapped around it, or whether you're specifying the arguments by building a pure function here and having this go this way. And you're arguing correctly, but I think it's that the case of attributes is not well handled here, right? In this case, it's also just not the case that when you define a function, you then expect to every time you use that function to be using it as it's
just that it expects. I don't think it's just that f expects certain arguments. Expects the index, for example, right? I mean, for example, if I wrote a function f,
the index, maybe you just write if it's power doesn't expect the index. It's just you've decided to feed it the index, right? Right. So you can specify that you're feeding it the index either this way or this way.
Wait,
we're just saying. The question of whether this is the primary way of doing it, whether we provide this way as well, is something of a detail as far as I'm concerned. We shouldn't kill this way of doing it just because we're going for this way of doing it.
Well, I guess my question is just let's not kill the second way.
I'm not necessarily
in favor of the first
one.
But if that happens, then I have no objections to both of these.
Right. But I mean, this way we don't have to do the lexical scanning of supplied. We have a different mechanism, which is more general.
Well, we have to do the lexical scanning of every single argument.
I know that.
So
we
we
have
haven't
ways-
actually, in fact, we're doing more work rather than less.
Okay. I think we can solve that problem.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there might be some obscure way of doing it with, some sort of down values or something. I don't know.
I think there are
I'm
ways
not
to
sure
do it,
how.
just like we have all kinds of ways to do it for
But sorry, I mean, the thing I'm arguing is just that these are very equivalent things. I mean, these are almost just different syntax.
Yes.
Well, to be clear, the first one is a strict subset of the second one.
I don't see what
Those
the
are
like. I think
functionality.
even
It's
the
the
case of
examples that
attributes.
were
No,
in
it is
in
not.
the-
It is
in-
not. It is not. Consider the rule case.
No, not even with the rule case. I mean, I don't understand I don't understand the use case where you could use, like, I just think these are basically just different syntax. I don't understand the use case where you could use supplied and you couldn't use this even with attributes. I mean, because supplied is just, again, applying the function with certain arguments, which is exactly what you're doing here. It's just a
I gave
question of
the
whether
example where you're putting in where you have a hold or something, and it's the difference between
Yeah, I
wrapping
think-
your function and wrapping an expression.
Yes, we understand.
you mean if F is hold all and you say,
Right. I just mean the first one is pure functions and the second one is arbitrary expressions. Therefore, the first one is a strict subset of the second one.
Except that the first one you can use this mechanism in rules and other places where you cannot use this mechanism. Because
right, I mean,
this
it
is the
seems like we would
function
need,
application mechanism.
if we want to do rules, then I think we definitely need something like the first one. The question is just whether or not we want to extend that to also be the thing for functions.
Yeah, I think the first one makes sense in the body of a pure function and on the right-hand side of rules.
Right.
I have no, I like
Right,
the
but I mean,
first
it seems like
I have no
that
opposition to the
mechanism
first one.
given that we're going to try and get people to understand this mechanism, that first mechanism seems very easy to understand. You know what this is analogous to? It's analogous to the function stack. Is it not? I mean, if I say map f of hash comma
Sure.
stack.
I mean, just in the sense that it's a symbol that it's a function that gives you information about the context in which the function is applied.
Right. Let's say this is a map all. Did I make a mistake here?
Does F have attributes or something?
No, actually, here's the problem. I need to say something like plus here.
Or
I guess this is correct. Yeah, I guess this is correct. This is a stack. That's just for the sake of
Oh yeah, the yes.
entertainingly obscure, but correct. Right, and you see that as it comes out, the stack is less deep.
Right, and that's why I was saying that maybe there'd be some way. Maybe there'd be some efficient way of implementing this with just down values of some kind.
Right, but the point that we're making here is, while this particular thing that we just did is not very useful, semantically, it's the same type of thing that we're asking for. Correct?
Yeah.
And although stack, which is kind of interesting, is global to the REPL, right? It isn't delimited. Its scope, its evaluation scope is not delimited by the map all. Right, the stack is referring to
maybe this thing wouldn't be either. It's just that it would have more stuff that it could tell you inside of map all.
Yeah, well, quite. I mean, that's an interesting possibility, that it has some questions it could ask that go all the way up to the REPL.
I mean, one concern would be, one concern would be just that I know functions like stack sometimes introduce sort of bizarre edge cases where it's like, Right,
Yeah,
you're
I
writing some piece of code and you expect that, oh, I'm just applying this function, but actually the function can look up into, into your code and do weird stuff and,
Right.
right.
But I do like the idea that this thing, which we can, is essentially a situational. It's an environment variable. It's a situational. I don't know what the right name for it is. Thing that has that's basically telling you about the evaluation state. All right. Well, okay. I think we'd had Tom here to talk about autocompletes, but actually the way that the semantics is developing, I don't think we need the autocompletes that we were thinking about before, because what we were thinking about was an autocomplete that depends on the fact that it's inside of supplied here, but I don't think we need that, but based on what we're now saying.
Okay.
I don't know. I
So-
mean, we probably need to think more about.
But
Can I
think
ask-
autocomplete is going to be harder, right?
Or easier, depending on how you look at it. The autocomplete is going to, if it is based on a funky symbol, I see what you're saying. Yes, the autocomplete is going to depend on what the outer function wrapping that was, whether it's a map or a cases or something else.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I think we need to think a bit more about the implementation of this thing and so on before we can.
Yeah,
say
I know.
that it
We're
makes
not ready for the
sense.
autocomplete. I was just checking that the
Right.
Before we go on, can I just ask, like, as a summary of what we just discussed? So you'd have the funky symbol that you would use in a pure function, and you wouldn't have to wrap the pure function in anything. You just use the pure function,
Yeah.
and have the funky symbol.
yeah, and the
Potentially
funky
you can
symbol,
also use funky symbol on the right hand side of a rule.
exactly. And the funky
Then
symbol,
could supplied just be the 2-argument thing, and it doesn't do the lexical scanning because
yeah, I think that's what
that's
we
just
would be talking
what
about.
funky
Yes.
symbol's job is.
Yes, that's
Okay.
what we'd be talking about.
Yes,
Okay.
and
By the way,
is that,
and I
is
would
that
argue.
at bang that you were proposing as the possible symbol?
I'm sorry, what are you saying? What?
For the syntax, is that at bang, at sign exclamation
That's what I
point?
typed, yes.
Okay.
At bang seems like a pseudo-random selection of
It's pseudo-random.
special
It's not serious. Okay.
Okay.
I'm just thinking about it. I mean,
But by the way, if we think of this thing as sort of like the quote unquote environment variable way, where it's basically just that as map goes, conceptually, I'm not sure this is how it actually works. Conceptually, it's just that as map goes, every iteration it will define environment variable of quotes index equals, whatever the new index is and so on. If that's how it worked, then if you did have a down value function f, you could just reference this thing in that function, and as long as the map is still happening, it's like block, that will be that variable.
yes, except you don't know that it has
I'm
to
not
be-
sure that's good code.
I'm not sure it's
Yeah, I
good
don't-
code, and I'm not sure it has to be. I mean, if we hadn't defined, okay, here's an outrageous suggestion, which probably won't work. Okay, just like if you use a capital letter variable name in your code, eventually, over the course of time, the function that you used and named with a capital letter could get overtaken, right? If you'd said subset replace, you'd had a function called subset replace in version 12 point whatever, that got overtaken by our system subset replace. Crazy suggestion. What if we use $sign and a capital letter, and these simply are that $index set, dynamically inside whatever it is? Is that completely crazy? And I mean, $index, if you normally used it, would just say, sorry, I don't know what the value is, the missing, not available, or whatever it is.
Instead of funky symbol of string index.
Yeah. That we just define a new symbol that is, we would have here, that they're,
Right. So this is the, in the same way that you could do funky symbol of quotes index, map could just run, conceptually
just
funky
say-
symbol of quotes index. It could instead just run $index equals blah, blah, blah.
well, here's what it would say. It would, if you want to do map indexed, you would simply say this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. As long as it's still okay that these
Uh,
symbols have different interpretations in different functions.
Yes, I mean it's just like you can look. I mean, we
I
have
think the
plenty of
interpret
things like
it's,
that.
it's not even interpret. It's just that the function map as it runs is, at least conceptually, maybe actually, redefining this symbol, and it's just documented that, hey, map redefines index in this way, and do redefines index in this other way, and and so on.
Yes,
I mean, there's a bit of a weird scoping thing of what if I
yeah,
want
I mean, like,
the
what is
index
the context of that symbol? And so anything that's
System.
dollar,
system.
anything that's dollar initial cap is now in system, even if it's completely meaningless.
Wait, no,
No,
it doesn't
Just
mean
the ones that
arbitrary.
we
No.
No.
Yeah, this
No.
and the actual assignment could work very much like what table does for its local variables.
Oh,
There is a
you're-
scoping
you're-
question,
You're,
though.
you're proposing that we define, a finite list of like
Yes.
$12
Yeah.
variables.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I thought you, well, what I misunderstood. So
Yeah.
I mean, it might be lots.
It might be quite a few, and there are a few here. I mean, where we would, these parameterized ones like results LM, we might not get those, or we might have a. I mean, this is a new family of variables. I mean, what are some other examples of things like this that get dynamically set? Dollar random state, does it get dynamically set?
Sorry. One other question is, what's the
Uh,
scoping? If I have a map in a map, if there's some way of getting the outer one.
I say no. I think
Okay.
it's too
So
weird.
if you want the outer one, when you do
define
the
it
inner
yourself.
map, you should pass in the current value of dollar index.
Yeah, I mean, it's like saying, can you
Yeah.
get the outer hash sign in the outer slot? And the answer is no. The only way to get, or the outer X, when you have two things called X nested within each other.
And the way to do that is just to add another argument to your inner function and then pass in X.
Mhm.
So it's dollar, right? I was going to say, in answer to your question, it's dollar random generator state, and yes, that is, the current value of the randomness generator, whatever that happens to be. So right, so it it effectively has a little down value, that its own value is essentially a little bit of down code that says what's the current generator state.
Right. Now, this could work the same kind of way. I don't know. It depends on what it's picking itself stuff up from. But this is certainly a clean way to do this, I think. And it's a way where the code will not look particularly obscure. I mean, if somebody types, that piece of code is not terribly obscure.
Right, and I like the fact that it has dollar in it. Since we're thinking of these as quote unquote environment variables, the fact that it has dollar in it.
Yeah, I
is a
know.
plus.
Why is it
Possible
stack
danger of
instead
this
dollar
is
stack?
if I define a function with a down value, say f of x, underscore colon equals, dollar index plus x, and I then do map of f, with usual scoping rules, that would quote work. It would set a value of index and then evaluate f, and that would be evaluated. Or are we thinking of something totally lexical here?
I'm not sure.
I was thinking it'd be more of a block situation.
Right. The problem there is, which that's totally flexible and amazing and nice. Problem there is that then we have to set all of these variables every instance.
Yeah, which we don't want to have to do.
Which we don't want to have to do. So I think we have to. I mean, as lovely as I think that would be, we have to keep it a lexical thing.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Ethan on our live stream is saying, don't use $sign. Everybody uses that for global variables. And it's true, people do use it for global variables. On the other hand, we have a limited.
On the other hand, they shouldn't use it with $sign capital variable names, but I'm sure they do.
I'm sure they do. Just like people use, and occasionally, I've found it's kind of amusing, a bunch of code from the early 90s that we're wheeling out again for the NKS book 20th anniversary thing. it works just fine, except that there are functions defined there that have now become built-in functions because they were used with capital letters and so on. And that's, that if that's the price of progress, it's not the worst thing in the world. And I don't think we have a lot of other characters that we can use here. I mean, we can think about it. But I mean, what other valid symbol names do we have? Because that's what we want here. Is we want something which is either, well, it could be an operator, but I think it's much nicer for it just to be a symbol name, because among other things, then we get to document this. $index is the locally defined index in these functions.
Right. Well, I mean, if we wanted to try to minimize breaking code, we could do $index, which is unlikely to be.
Yes, I understand. I mean, by the time people are using $, we can review this. Yeah.
And right, and I suppose one argument in favor of $, is that it sort of suggests that it's something different from your normal global variables.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not very hard to type, and it's not very ugly. It reminds me deeply of SMP, but that's a different matter. It had a use for those things. Anyway, never mind that. Its use wasn't very good. That's not terrible. I mean, I agree that saves the obscurity of global variables. Because we haven't used $, for anything, right?
Not anything in system context.
No, we use it sometimes for internal things, but in more or less this way.
Right.
Well, I agree that's not terrible. And it's not as obscure as I thought it was going to be. I mean, I'm used to it being obscure because we use it obscurely in our internal code. I like this. Let's inventory what it would take, and let's understand the implementation here, and let's inventory what symbols we would actually want, and see where we go from there. We have run out of time. So, yeah, this is an important thing. All right, we should wrap up here.